We don't tell you this story to frighten you. We tell it because we truly love and care for you. And we believe some truths should never be buried. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now grab your coffee, and let's get started. The train's whistle came not with force, but like something apologetic, like a memory trying not to be remembered. It moaned once into the fog, and was gone. Eleanor Edevane stepped down onto the platform of Hollowmere Station with a stillness that seemed not hers, but inherited. She was 32 and looked much older beneath her funeral hat. No other passengers disembarked. The porter watched her only briefly, then turned away as though he had not seen her at all. Beyond the cracked wooden planks of the platform, Withering Hollow unfolded in a hush of swamp vapors and moss-draped trees. The land felt sunken, as though memory weighed it down, and the air carried that particular silence known only in places where the dead outnumber the living. It had been 27 years since she last stepped foot in the hollow. She had not returned when her father died, nor when her mother's name was etched into the blackened marble of the chapel crypt. She had not come back when the manor was vandalized by faceless men in the 1980s, nor when her cousin Benedict reportedly vanished in the nearby marshlands without sound or trail. Only now, when all other Edevanes had passed or disappeared, did she return. Not by choice, but because no one else remained to answer the solicitor's letter. The house had waited. It had waited without complaint. A hired carriage took her down the gravel path that used to be called Hollow Way. The road was no longer listed on any map. Ferns overtook the road's edge, and the trees leaned inward like ancient parishioners in prayer. Occasionally, she saw remnants of forgotten farmhouses, all windowless, all devoured by creeping vines. The driver said nothing during the hour-long ride. When Eleanor asked him if the town had changed, he simply stared ahead. His hands, she noticed, trembled, not from cold, but from restraint. As the carriage turned onto Edevane Hill, she felt it in her bones before she saw it. The air thickened. Her teeth ached, just slightly. Somewhere, a crow called, but the sound did not echo, and then it came into view. The house, Edevane Manor, stood like an open wound at the crown of the hill. It was not ruined, as she had half expected, but intact, not decayed, simply paused. The windows were tall and sealed in darkness. Ivy did not climb its surface, no birds nested in its eaves, and the chimney, despite the summer heat, breathed a single column of pale smoke that curled like a question. The house had been asleep, but now it remembered. The driver did not help with her luggage. He placed the 2 trunks by the iron gate and waited with eyes lowered. She offered a thank you. He drove off without reply. The gate gave way without effort. No groan, no rust. Just a silent swing, as though it had missed her. The garden was overgrown but orderly, almost groomed in its neglect. The roses were in bloom but carried no scent. Their petals were slightly wilted, as though mourning something only they could name. The path to the front steps was lined with cracked stones, but none loose enough to trip. The house, in its own way, welcomed her. The key turned with a sigh. Inside, the air was not stale. It was scented faintly of candle wax and cedar. The grandfather clock in the entrance hall ticked. Slow, deliberate, unwound for decades and yet correct. Its face bore no dust. Portraits lined the hallway, eyes covered in shadow. She did not recognize them. Men mostly. Some with high collars, some with clerical pins, one with a black medallion clasped in gloved hands. All their eyes were turned just slightly. Not toward the viewer, but toward a door that did not exist. As she stepped inside, the door closed behind her. It did not slam. It sealed, like the shutting of a book. She stood in the foyer for a long time. The silence was not empty. It was attentive. The floor beneath her boots did not creak. No wind passed through the windows, and yet the house breathed. At the edge of her vision, she caught something move, a shadow that shifted not with the light, but against it. She blinked. It was gone. Eleanor removed her gloves, then her hat. She did not weep, not yet, but her hands trembled as she touched the banister and felt, beneath her palm, the faintest warmth. The wood pulsed, not like life, but like memory, like something waiting to be remembered. The drawing room had not changed. Her mother's tea set still rested on the table by the window, untouched, unsullied by time or dust. A single cup had a crack that ran down the side, one she remembered making when she was 7. It had not grown deeper. The fire was lit. No one had been hired to prepare the house, no caretaker, no staff, no recent footsteps in the garden path, and yet the fire was lit. She sat, not out of ease, but necessity. The house, for all its silence, bore a weight that made standing feel dishonest. Her hands folded in her lap. The light dimmed, though the sky outside had not changed. She remembered dimly the stories, that Edevane men were always born blind, that the family had once been midwives and candle makers, but never priests and never farmers. That her grandfather, Gregory, had written in his will that no Edevane man should ever be buried in consecrated soil. That her brother, Edgar, was born without pupils and died at 7. His body was never buried. She remembered her mother sewing shut the curtains at night. She remembered the nursery door that had no keyhole. She remembered waking one morning to find the family Bible burned to cinders in the hearth, and no one speaking of it, ever. Attention! The fire crackled once. She did not flinch. Outside, the fog thickened. The world beyond the window grew unreal, like a painting losing color. And upstairs, in the eastern hallway, a floorboard gave a single groan. Not loud, not angry, just there. She did not go upstairs that night. She slept in the drawing room, wrapped in her coat, with the fire keeping her warm and the portraits above the mantel watching without light, and as sleep took her. Not gently, but with the slow pull of old waters. She heard something like breath. Not hers, not human. It was the house. It was remembering her. We don't tell you this story to frighten you. We tell it because we truly love and care for you, and we believe some truths should never be buried. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now grab your coffee, and let's get started. The town of Withering Hollow had grown smaller, not from time, but from retreat. It folded in on itself like an old letter too long unread. The shops bore no names. The cobblestones were uneven, but never loose. The trees seemed to whisper to each other in a language that predated the arrival of ink or scripture. Eleanor returned to town on foot. It was a grey morning, if morning it could be called. The sun hadn't broken the fog in 2 days. Her boots sank lightly into the earth along the old vicar's path, a trail once worn by clergy, now overtaken by weeds that bowed at her approach. At the village edge stood St. Lugarius, the stone chapel that once served as spiritual marrows for the hollow. Its bell had not rung since the funeral of her grandmother. Ivy had climbed high around its tower, but not across the stained-glass saints, who still watched the graveyard with exhausted grace. They looked out upon the forgotten and the damned. She went there not for answers, but to feel what remained. Her memories were vague, half-shadowed scenes of her mother kneeling in silence beside the nave, her brother drawing invisible circles in the dust of the pews, the priest with a milky film over both eyes who gave sermons no one ever remembered. She'd once asked her father what the priest had preached, and he'd replied, "Nothing, child." That's the point. As Eleanor passed under the rusted iron arch of the chapel gate, the wind shifted direction. Not stronger, simply new. The scent of wet bark and old stone rose to meet her, and beneath the belfry, she saw the woman. She stood motionless, like something left behind. Her shawl was soaked, her hair uncombed, but her posture was unbroken. A grey woolen dress clung to her thin frame. She did not lean for balance, nor blink against the wind. Her face bore the map of long memory. Sunken cheeks, colourless eyes, skin like parchment curled at the edges. As Eleanor neared, the woman turned her head just slightly. She did not ask her name. She already knew. "You are the last of the root," the woman rasped. Her voice cracked like kindling under a damp flame. "You should not have come." Eleanor stopped. There was no one else in sight. No parishioners, no caretaker. The doors of the church were chained shut. The woman tilted her head again. "Do not stay through the second moon." Before Eleanor could respond, the woman closed her mouth, not like one finishing a sentence, but like a door being sealed. She stepped back into the shadows of the chapel wall and did not reappear. There was no rustle of departure, no footsteps on the moss, only the low, barely audible creak of something very old shifting in the timber of the belfry above. Eleanor lingered a moment, unsure if she should knock on the locked church door or retreat. The silence that followed felt cultivated, not abandoned, like a ritual not yet performed. She turned away. The villagers she passed that afternoon did not speak. One or two nodded, but their eyes did not rise to meet hers. An old man sweeping the steps of the bakery crossed himself when she looked his way. A child stared at her from a window, then vanished behind lace curtains. A woman in a butcher's apron whispered something to her daughter and tightened the door latch behind her. Eleanor asked the shopkeeper at the general store if he knew where she could find candles. He pointed without a word to the back shelf, never once raising his gaze. When she paid, the coins sat untouched for several seconds before he finally slid them into the register. He did not say goodbye. The fog was thicker when she returned to the manor. The path seemed longer, though she had not strayed. As she reached the gate, she noticed something had changed. The roses along the garden wall were darker, not wilted, simply deeper in hue as if stained. The petals no longer bent in the breeze. They stood rigid, almost bristling. Inside the house, the fire was burning. It should have gone out, but it hadn't. The smell of the house was different now, no longer wax and cedar. Something faintly bitter clung to the air. Not unpleasant, just remembered. She removed her coat, placed it on the hook by the door, and paused. The silence welcomed her back. Not in kindness, but in recognition. In the parlor, the grandfather clock had stopped. It had always ticked before, unwound but persistent. Now its face was still, and the hands both pointed to 12. She touched the glass. It was warm. Later that evening, Eleanor opened the old kitchen pantry in search of matches, and found a single object placed precisely at the center of the bottom shelf. A bundle of 7 white candles, bound with faded gray twine. The wax had not yellowed. The string was knotted with purpose. A scrap of paper was tucked into the knot. It read only, "To keep the eyes away." She did not remember placing them there. She lit one and carried it to the drawing room. The flame danced not with the air but with the shadows on the wall, moving in tandem with a rhythm she could not hear. When she passed the mirror in the hallway, she saw not her own reflection, but a slightly younger version of herself. The hair was the same, the dress the same, but the eyes were closed. She looked again. The mirror was empty. She whispered aloud, "I am not the last," and the house sighed. That night she dreamt of the chapel, not as it stood now, but as it had once been. Dozens of white candles lit every pew, and each window glowed with blue and red fire. The choir sang, though none had mouths. The priest stood at the altar, head bowed, and the belfry bell began to ring. Once, twice, thrice. But the sound was hollow, like bone striking bone. She awoke with the taste of ashes in her mouth. The candle had burned low, but not out. At dawn, she returned to the belfry. She found no woman, no footprints, no sign that anyone had stood beneath that arch in a decade. The chains on the chapel doors were rusted clean through. And beneath the door frame, scratched into the stone, were 7 vertical lines, like tally marks made with the edge of a knife. She ran her fingers over them. They were fresh, and far above, hidden behind moss and decay. The bell turned once, just a hair, as if pulled by invisible hands. She did not look up. As she walked back toward the manor, the fog followed. The wind did not. We don't tell you this story to frighten you. We tell it because we truly love and care for you, and we believe some truths should never be buried. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now grab your coffee, and let's get started. The eastern corridor was never meant to be walked. That much Eleanor could feel in her bones. The wood there was too smooth, too forgiving underfoot, as if no one had ever dared to let their weight settle into it. Dust gathered in patterns that did not match the rest of the manor, perfectly even, untouched by time, disturbed only when she passed. It was here, on the 3rd day of her return, that she noticed the door. It had not been there before. Or rather, she had not noticed it. It stood at the far end of the corridor behind a velvet curtain that hung without rod or hook, suspended from the ceiling as if grown from the house itself. The fabric was deep green, almost black, with tiny flecks of mold or dust embedded in the folds like stars pressed into sky. When she pulled it aside, it fell without resistance. There was no knob, no keyhole, no hinges, just a door, pale, perfectly flat, carved from a wood she did not recognize. Whitewashed, but not with paint. It had the color of bone, and it made no sound. She placed her hand on its surface and felt nothing. Not cold, not warmth, just stillness. Like the silence one finds deep beneath water where sound does not travel. That night, Eleanor dreamed of the hallway again. But in the dream, she was much younger, her hands small and unscarred. She carried a single brass key, heavy for its size, with a black ribbon looped through its eye. As she approached the door, the hallway behind her lengthened. The walls stretched upward, the floor narrowed beneath her feet. The key glowed, but the door did not open. She woke with her right hand aching as if it had been clenched in sleep for hours. When she opened her palm, there were 2 faint crescent marks, fingernail wounds, yet her nails were short and clean. Downstairs, the grandfather clock had begun ticking again. She had not wound it. She walked the house in her robe, candle in hand. The shadows no longer felt idle. They leaned in. They listened. In the conservatory, the orchids had turned. Not fully, but their petals no longer faced the sun. They bowed toward the hallway. Eleanor returned to the eastern corridor. The door was still there, still silent, still waiting. She whispered, "What do you want from me?" The candle sputtered. A breeze, maybe, or the house exhaling. On the 5th night, the dreams changed. Now she stood before the door with both hands pressed against it, weeping, not from fear, from knowing. The bone-colored wood throbbed beneath her touch, slow and deliberate, like a heart buried alive. When she awoke, the bruise was already forming, 2 fingertips on her left wrist, as though someone had gently held her in sleep. She found herself walking the manor by habit, as if retracing the paths her mother once took. The drawing room, the gallery, the sunroom, where dust clung to the corners like ash. Each room contained something slightly misremembered, a misplaced book, a faded rug, a photo album she did not recognize, filled with faces without labels. And everywhere she went, the sound, or the lack of it, followed her. In houses of that age, there is always noise. Wood settling, pipes groaning, floorboards speaking to one another across generations. But the Edevane manor did not creak. It did not hum. It breathed. At dusk, Eleanor sat in the library, leafing through the black-bound volumes her grandfather once kept under lock and key. Most were genealogies, tracing the Edevane bloodline back to 1622, when the family first arrived in the hollow from the salt marshes of Norfolk. Others were filled with sermons, rituals, handwritten in Latin and marked with sigils she dared not speak aloud. Every generation had kept records, but they ended abruptly in 1891, the year her great-grandfather, Elias, was born. Elias, it was said, never spoke a word after the age of 10, and he was the first to be born without eyes. In a smaller volume, tucked beneath the false bottom of a drawer, she found something stranger, a journal. The pages were brittle, water-stained, the ink faded in places to a rust-like hue. The handwriting was familiar. She recognized it from the letter her father left behind the night he died. It was a diary. The entries were short, unemotional, but certain patterns emerged. Mentions of dreams, of a room that had no name, descriptions of a door that hummed beneath the skin, and the same phrase, written over and over in various forms. It calls when the blood thins. Eleanor did not understand, but the phrase took root. She returned to the corridor at midnight. Something compelled her. The candle in her hand burned lower than expected, as if consumed not just by flame, but by presence. She placed her palm on the door again. This time she felt it. Movement, not behind, within. A subtle, rhythmic push, like something gently pressing back, matching the beat of her breath. She closed her eyes. And in that instant, she remembered something long buried. A moment from childhood. A Sunday morning, rain pressing against the windows in perfect silence. Her mother, standing in the hallway, staring at the wall where the door now stood, eyes wide, lips pale. Her hand reached forward and stopped. Not from hesitation, from instruction. Her father had appeared then, placing his hand gently over hers. "No," he had whispered. "Not until she asks." Eleanor opened her eyes. She had never asked, until now. That night she could not sleep. The bed was too still, the house too alive. She returned to the drawing room and watched the fire die slowly, each ember a pulse, fading into darkness. And as the last glow flickered, she heard it, faint, distant, but real. 3 knocks, not loud, not demanding, just present. They came from the eastern corridor. She did not move, but she whispered, "I heard you." And from somewhere beyond the door, something shifted, not like movement, but like alignment, like something had waited centuries for those words to be spoken. We don't tell you this story to frighten you. We tell it because we truly love and care for you, and we believe some truths should never be buried. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now grab your coffee, and let's get started. The attic welcomed no sound, not even the wind, which often stirred the rest of the house like an old song, dared climb so high. Eleanor opened the warped door with both hands, bracing her shoulder, expecting resistance, but the latch gave easily, as if encouraged. A hush escaped, like breath from a tomb. She stepped inside. Light filtered only through a circular window stained by age, dust, and moss. It bathed the space in sickly amber, revealing clutter not arranged by time, but by forgetting. Stacks of furniture stood like gravestones. Boxes lined the beams, old chairs pointed at nothing, dolls, eyeless and disjointed, waited in cradles never meant for use. Beneath a moth-eaten veil of linen, a child's rocking horse faced the far corner, its legs cracked but balanced as if caught mid-motion. It wasn't memory that brought her to the attic. It was hunger, Not hers, the house's. She felt it pressing behind her thoughts, not a command, but a suggestion. A gentle hand turned her body to the far side, to a trunk beneath a sheet of coarse black fabric. Not dusted, not disturbed, simply veiled. She lifted the cloth. The trunk was bound in iron, corners rusted but no lock. It opened with a click that felt ceremonial. Inside lay books, wrapped in linen, each one tied with red cord. The first bore her grandfather's initials. The second, a name she did not recognize. And beneath them all, a third volume, much smaller, stained dark at the corners. Its twine had already been severed. No title, just a sigil carved faintly into the leather, a circle with 3 crosses beneath it. The Edevane mark, but older. Not as it appeared on family seals, but rougher, more primitive, as though carved in urgency. She carried it downstairs, lit 3 candles, and began to read. The entries were dated between 1875 and 1881. They belonged to Samuel Edevane, 3rd son of Gregory and Mildred, a name that had rarely been spoken in family circles, save for one chilling association: the boy who broke the lineage. His writing was precise, spare. Every sentence was measured, lacking flourish. Yet the words trembled with something just beneath. Something not quite madness, but grief unspoken too long. August 12th, 1875. Father no longer lets us eat in the dining room. We eat in shifts now, always by candlelight. Edgar says he saw something move in the hallway during supper. Mother says we mustn't listen when the house breathes. She has taken to sewing her curtains shut with black thread. September 4th, 1876. The door appeared again, this time at the end of the nursery. Father placed salt in the corners, said the bloodline remembers where it began. I asked what that meant. He said nothing, just gave me the key and told me not to sleep in the attic. October 31st, 1876. They buried the dog without eyes. He was born under the eclipse. Same as Edgar. Same as the man in the portrait no one names. The mirror in the west corridor won't reflect us anymore. I don't like when it chooses. Eleanor paused. The language was cold, unflinching, but she felt it in her chest, the fear hidden in restraint. A child writing what he dared not say aloud. January 3rd, 1877. We heard whispering through the walls last night, not voices, just breath shaped into thought. I covered my ears but still heard it. Edgar didn't. He only smiled. March 19th, 1877. I followed Father down into the cellar past the 3rd door. He did not see me. Beneath the chapel lies a room. He placed a candle on the floor and began to pray in a tongue I didn't know. There were bones along the wall. Some still wore rings. June 6th, 1878. I woke with blood in my ears. Not mine, not human. Something walks inside the walls. It stops when I speak. The house only listens when it's hungry. They must be quiet. The diary became more erratic after that. The spacing of entries widened. Words were misspelled. Sentences trailed off. And then, one final entry, unnumbered, undated. The handwriting far shakier, as though the ink had trembled before touching the page. I saw what Father hid in the mirror, and now it sees me. That was the last line. The rest of the page was filled with deep gouges, as if the pen had dug into the paper long after the ink had run dry. Beneath it, a single fingerprint, dark reddish-brown, had pressed into the margin. Eleanor closed the diary. The candle beside her had shrunk to a stub. The shadows had moved closer. She looked toward the hallway. The eastern corridor waited in stillness, its silence heavier now. It wasn't simply absence. It was listening. She returned to the attic in the morning. The light came gray as if filtered through water. She checked the trunk again and found something new. A strip of linen, the same that had bound the diary. now rested on top of the other volumes. It hadn't been there before. Written upon it, faint and in child's handwriting, were 3 words. He never left. She dropped it, backed away. Behind her, the rocking horse rocked once. Not violently, not abruptly, just gently, as though acknowledging her presence. That night, Eleanor dreamt of Samuel. He was not a boy anymore. His face bore age, but not clarity, blurred at the edges, like a figure seen through damp glass. He stood beside a mirror that rippled like oil. His mouth moved, but no sound emerged. In his hands, he held the diary. He opened it, but the pages were blank. He began to scream, not aloud, but inside her, a scream that pressed against her ribs and echoed behind her eyes. She woke, gasping. The candle by her bedside had melted onto the floor. The mirror across the room had fogged, though the air was cold. And in its center, drawn by a finger, was the same sigil from the diary, the circle and 3 crosses. The 3rd son had never left. His silence had been inherited, and the door was waiting for her to remember. We don't tell you this story to frighten you. We tell it because we truly love and care for you, and we believe some truths should never be buried. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now grab your coffee, and let's get started. It was an overcast morning when Eleanor found the door. Not the attic door, not the ornate entryway, nor the warped pantry latch. This one had no hinges. No doorknob, just a square of iron buried into the soil behind the house, half covered by vines and moldering leaves. It wasn't visible from the kitchen window. She had never seen it mentioned in any of the floor plans or family records. But when she stepped outside, the wind guided her there. The same strange wind that had turned her grandfather's portrait in the hallway the night before. Not fallen, not broken, just rotated slightly, as if facing something newly arrived. She knelt, brushed back the vines. A trap door. It groaned when she pulled it open, revealing a stone shaft carved into the earth. A spiral of descending steps, slick with moisture and dusted with bone-colored spores. The scent that rose from within was not rot, but sweetness, sickly, like spoiled fruit or overripe lilies. The air felt warmer down there. She descended with a candle and silence. Each step was carved from gray stone, but the walls were made of packed earth, riddled with roots that pulsed faintly when touched. At the bottom, the space opened into what might have once been a root cellar. Low ceilings, shelves carved into the dirt, and clay jars arranged in patterns. But everything was wrong. The shelves weren't level. The jars were unsealed, and the entire room sloped slightly, like it had been sinking for a long, long time. And in the center of the floor, a chair, not a stool, not a bench, but a formal wooden chair, with velvet still clinging to its frame, sunken into the dirt as though it had grown there. Someone was sitting in it. Eleanor didn't scream. She couldn't. The woman's back was to her. She was impossibly still, the long black veil over her head unmoving in the warm, fetid air. Her hands were folded in her lap. Skin pale, almost waxy, and beneath the veil, just the faintest glimpse of skin. Scarred at the jaw, but undeniably human. Eleanor's candle flickered violently. And then, the woman began to hum. It was barely audible, a cracked tune off-key and rhythmless. But it filled the entire room. Not with volume, but with presence. The roots along the walls twitched, curling slightly inward. The jars vibrated in place. And Eleanor felt her chest tighten, not from fear, but recognition. She had heard this lullaby before. A recording, played once by her mother during a storm when the power went out. She had claimed it was an old family tune, a folk melody passed down from the Edevane nurses, whatever that meant. Eleanor had never been able to find it in any archive. She took a step back, The humming stopped. The woman didn't turn, but her hands slowly raised and began to tap her lap, gently, like counting. 1, 2, 3, pause. 1, 2, pause. 3, 1, 3. Eleanor turned and fled. Back up the steps, into the daylight, where the overcast sky looked blindingly bright. She slammed the trap door shut and placed a heavy rock over it. But she knew, in the marrow of her bones, it would open again. Not on its own, but when it wanted to. That night, Eleanor did not sleep. She read instead. Everything she could find. Journals, letters, family Bibles. She traced the Edevane genealogy back 5 generations. A pattern emerged. Each generation had 3 sons. Always 3. The firstborn always died. The second vanished or went mad. And the third, always a silence around them. No records of marriage. No burial dates. Just a blank space where a life should have been. And in every generation, a mother who died early, and whose body was never interred in the family plot. Instead, missing, hidden, sat somewhere beneath the house. She returned to the attic in a daze. Flipping through Samuel's diary again, she noticed something she had missed, a margin note in pencil nearly rubbed away. She keeps the firstborn. She always has. She flipped further. On the inside of the back cover, beneath the leather lining, something had been sewn in. She pried it loose. A photograph, stained but intact. It showed 3 boys, one smiling, one frowning, and one, the smallest, standing with his eyes closed, mouth slightly parted. In the background, behind them, was a woman in black. Her face was obscured, but the shape of her hands. Eleanor dropped the photograph. Her mother had told her stories as a child. Nursery rhymes from Cornwall. Warnings about the basement bride, a woman in mourning who lived in root cellars and took the first son of every family that spoke her name. Eleanor had thought it a ghost story, a way to frighten children into silence. But this woman in the photograph had her family's ring, and she had not aged in over a century. That evening, Eleanor returned to the trap door. She told herself she needed answers, that the veil must be lifted, that the pattern had to break. But when she opened the trap door, she did not descend. She waited, and the humming returned, not from below this time, but from behind her, in the trees, in the soil, beneath the boards of the house. The woman was no longer just beneath the earth. She was everywhere the name Edevane was spoken. The lullaby became words. 3 sons born, 3 sons bleed, 1 shall bury, 1 shall seed. But the first I take to keep me fed. A son without eyes shall wake the dead. Eleanor dropped to her knees, clutching her ears. But it wasn't the voice that broke her. It was the final line of the song, whispered in her father's voice. The chair is empty. She's waiting for you. The next morning, the townspeople said the old Edevane estate had gone silent. No birds in the trees, no lights in the windows, and that night, for the first time in decades, the mirror in the town chapel cracked on its own. Inside it, some claimed they saw a woman seated in a cellar chair, her veil lifted ever so slightly, revealing not a face, but a hollow cavity. Not empty, just waiting. We tell this story because it refuses to stay buried. We tell it because it wants to be heard. But before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it there? Now take a deep breath. Let's begin. It is said there was once a midwife in Lantern Hollow who delivered every Edevane child for 3 generations. She had no name, not one the town remembered. They called her the midwife, or the Hollow Woman. She never walked to the estate. She arrived, usually before dawn, without sound or carriage. She never aged. Her face remained gaunt but smooth, a translucent mask with lips like chalk and eyes clouded over in white. But she never needed to see to know what was coming. The last time she was summoned, it was winter. January 1912. The house was weighed down by fog, the windows thick with frost. Inside, Eleanor's great-grandmother, Lydia Edevane, lay in labor. For 14 hours she screamed. The doctors said the child had turned, that it wasn't breathing, that something was wrong. The midwife, seated beside the fire, said nothing. And then, when the pain grew worse, she stood. She didn't wash her hands. She didn't wear gloves. She simply leaned over Lydia, whispering words in a language no one present recognized. And the screaming stopped, just like that. Lydia's body convulsed once, then relaxed. The baby was born moments later. It didn't cry. The room fell into a silence described later by Lydia's sister as deep and underwater, like we'd all been pulled below something enormous. The child, a boy, opened his mouth. His limbs moved. His chest rose. But he had no eyes, just soft indentations, sealed skin, as if nothing had ever been there to begin with. Lydia wept, but not in horror, in relief. And when asked later, she insisted she'd seen something in the midwife's presence. She claimed in the final moments of pain, she had seen the roots of the house, beneath the cellar, beneath the stone, beneath the bones of old men, and a woman far below waiting for the child, arms open. And she had smiled. That child was Eleanor's grandfather. He lived longer than any other Edevane man. He never married, never left the estate. Spoke rarely, walked slowly, always barefoot, always knowing exactly where he was without the use of eyes. He painted hundreds of canvases, all abstract but with recurring shapes. Spirals, mouths, doorways, and chairs. One of those paintings still hangs in the local museum, misattributed to an anonymous modernist. Its title is simple: She Who Hears the Blood. In the center of the painting is a woman with no face. Behind her, a hallway of mouths. The year that painting was made, 1951, was the year the midwife returned. She wasn't invited. She simply appeared on the edge of the property one spring night, standing beneath the sycamore tree where the family's first house had once burned. She said she had come to collect the second promise. No one knew what she meant. But within a week, the family's second son, Eleanor's great-uncle, was found at the base of the cellar stairs, neck broken, eyes missing. Removed surgically. The coroner later swore they had been taken with precision, like the hand knew exactly where the soul was stored. The midwife was never seen again. Decades passed, and then Eleanor was born. She was the first girl in 3 generations, and unlike the boys, she was born with perfect sight. She could see vividly, but from the start, she dreamed in third person. As a toddler, she would wake screaming about the woman in the garden. Not just at night, but during the day, during naps, even when she was sick. The drawings she made as a child always featured a black-robed figure in the background. Never in the center, always watching. By age 12, Eleanor had developed a condition the family doctor called inherited prosopagnosia, face blindness. She stopped recognizing people's expressions, even those of her mother. She claimed they shifted too often to be real. At 15, she lost all sense of left and right. She could move through rooms, but felt they folded around her rather than staying in place. And by 17, she began to hear humming, but only in places where blood had been spilled. She once fainted in the woods behind the house when she tripped and scraped her knee on a root. When she came to, she claimed she had seen the midwife. Not as an old woman, but as a shadow of bone wrapped in wind, and that she had thanked Eleanor for preserving the line. In 1999, Eleanor's brother James was born. He was the first boy in 50 years. At the hospital, the nurses screamed when they saw him, not because he lacked eyes, but because his face bore scars already healed, as though something had once been cut and stitched closed again. He cried like any infant, but in the recording the family made of his birth, if you turn the volume up at the end of the tape, just after the doctor announces the time, you can hear a second voice. Not one in the room. Older, wiser, too close to the microphone, whispering, "We feed the house in threes." No one has explained it. Eleanor never forgot it. Years later, as adults, Eleanor and James stopped speaking, not from hatred, but from shared knowledge. James had developed a habit of drawing maps, not of places, but of passageways. Ones that didn't exist in the house, but which he swore he had walked through in dreams. He said they always began in the cellar, passed through the root walls, and into an area where the house breathes. He said the midwife lived there, and that she had prepared a room for Eleanor, a birthing room. Eleanor refused to ask why, but after her father died, and she returned to the estate alone, she knew she was not returning to remember the past. She was there to fulfill it. On the night of her return, Eleanor went down into the root cellar once more. She brought no candle this time, no phone. She went alone, barefoot. When she entered the chamber, the woman in the chair was no longer seated. She was standing, and behind her, where once there had been a wall, was now a narrow hallway of flesh and soil. It pulsed, and in the distance, somewhere too far to measure, a baby cried. Not in fear, in welcome. Eleanor didn't speak. She stepped forward. The earth moved with her, and the midwife held out her hands, not to stop her, to receive her. The local priest, Father Jansen, later said that at 3:06 a.m. that night, the chapel bell rang 13 times, even though the rope was untouched. He said the air inside the building had turned metallic, and all mirrors fogged over. When he wiped one clean, he said he didn't see his reflection. He saw a birthing room filled with candlelight, and someone weeping joyfully, as a woman without eyes cradled something in her arms. He never went back. The next day, the Edevane estate was empty. But in the root cellar, at the foot of the chair, there was a new object left behind. A painted wooden sign, freshly nailed into the dirt. In letters carved deep and dark, it read, "The line is preserved." Before we open this tomb, ask yourself, what was buried before the house was ever built, and who has been waiting to be found? The garden at the rear of the Edevane estate was never meant to be beautiful. It grew with disobedience, tangled hedges, sunken rows, and a perimeter of yew trees thick enough to hide behind. No one in the family had tended it for decades, yet nothing died. Even in winter, something lived beneath it. Eleanor remembered playing there as a child, not out of joy, but because she had to. Something had always pulled her there, not physically, not emotionally, but inwardly, like a hand pressing lightly against the back of her thoughts. She used to dig, without knowing why. Small holes at first, then deeper ones. Once, she buried a doll in the northern plot near the wild thorns. 3 days later, it returned. Not above ground, but placed neatly on her windowsill. The eyes had been removed and stitched closed with thread. Her mother told her it was just a prank. But Eleanor knew otherwise. The garden, her grandfather once said, has a memory of its own. It wasn't until her father died that Eleanor returned with a purpose. His will had been sparse. No possessions of note, no instructions, just one envelope sealed with red wax, containing a single sentence. You will know where to go when the house no longer breathes. She waited until the 5th night, until the window stopped misting, until the cellar grew cold, until the candles no longer flickered without cause, until the heartbeat of the home so faint it could only be felt when the house was truly still, went quiet. Then she went to the garden, not with tools, but with bare hands. She walked past the old willow, past the hedge's curve, to a patch of earth untouched by root or weed, a perfect oval of dry soil, as though something beneath it kept the life above from growing. She knelt and began to dig. It took hours, and when her fingers struck the first stone, her nose began to bleed, not from exertion, but from recognition. The soil was too soft. Beneath it, ash, bones, and what appeared to be burnt feathers. Then, slate. A slab, rounded at the edge, sealed not with mortar, but with teeth. Tiny molars packed like gravel around the lid. She lifted it and felt the air change. Not a breeze, not decay, but presence. The tomb was circular, a spiral staircase descending into darkness so complete it made her retch. She did not light a match. She did not speak. She descended for 87 steps. She counted, and when she reached the bottom, she found herself standing in a chamber shaped like a heart. Not metaphorically, but anatomically. The walls were veined. The ceiling throbbed. In the center stood an altar, and on that altar, a book bound in skin. The cover bore no title, just an imprint, the outline of a hand pressed deeply into the flesh, as though someone had been reaching out for centuries. She did not touch it, not yet. She looked up and saw the carvings. The ceiling bore a mural, older than any part of the house above. It depicted a woman, tall, eyeless, standing above a line of kneeling figures, each of them bleeding from the sockets. Her hands were raised, and from them flowed not blood, but roots, burying themselves in the backs of the worshippers' heads. They were not in pain. They were offering themselves. Around the mural's edge were symbols, not letters, but fetal shapes, each curled differently, like phases of some terrible gestation. Below it, etched in English, "From her loss came lineage, from her womb the watchers, and the third will be her heir." Eleanor stepped back. The air grew warmer, and from behind her, something breathed. The chamber was not empty. To the left of the altar stood a statue, or what appeared to be one. A tall figure over 7 feet, carved from some black, porous stone. No eyes, no arms, just the form of a woman swollen in the middle, heavily pregnant, mouth open, head tilted up. At first, Eleanor thought it was simply carved, but as she approached, she saw the chest rise. Once, then stillness. And when she looked into the open mouth, she saw rows of teeth not made of stone. She fell backward, but she did not scream. Some part of her had expected this. Some part of her had always known. In the records Eleanor would later compile, she began to write this place as the womb below, a temple built long before the estate, older than the town, older than the road, possibly older than language. She discovered that in 1783, during the foundation of the original Edevane house, the laborers had uncovered a hollow in the soil lined with runes. 3 men went down. 1 returned. He never spoke again, and within 3 months his wife gave birth to a boy without eyes. That was the first recorded member of the Edevane line, and the only document to mention him by name referred to him simply as the witness. Back in the tomb, Eleanor approached the book. The moment her hand touched the cover, the walls of the room pulsed, not violently, not angrily, but with welcome. The book opened itself. Inside were no words, no chapters, only portraits, dozens of them, each one a woman, each one pregnant, each one painted without eyes. At the bottom of every page, the same phrase. 1 womb, 1 line, 1 window, and then she turned to the final page. It was blank, except for a name, Eleanor May Edevane. Below it, to be received, She closed the book, returned to the surface, and when she emerged, dawn had not yet broken, but the air had changed. The birds did not sing, the wind did not stir, but the house was breathing again, and at the edge of the garden stood a figure in black, the midwife. Only now Eleanor saw her clearly. Not old, not blind, but incomplete. Half her face was smooth and ageless, the other half gone as though burned away, revealing a hollow socket and bone blackened by centuries. She did not speak. She simply bowed and extended one hand, not to lead, but to witness. And Eleanor, without hesitation, bowed in return. Later that year, locals claimed they saw strange lights on the Edevane property. 3 neighbors reported hearing weeping in the garden at night. Not of sadness, but ecstatic grief, like someone remembering something they had tried to forget. A mailman swore he saw a crib placed beside the old fountain, though no child had been born in the house for decades, and in the town's small newspaper a single classified ad ran for 1 day only. Midwife available for home births, discretion insured, eyes optional. No contact info, no name, just a black spiral as the logo. When asked about it, the editor swore he never printed the ad, that no one had paid for it, that it had simply appeared. And when he went to remove it, the ink had turned to ash in his hands. What would you like Chapter 8 to explore next? The first mother who made the pact beneath the estate? The ritual pregnancy of Eleanor? The fate of James, the last Edevane male? Or something darker? A birthing not meant for this world? Just say the word. Before the Edevanes, there was another name. Before the house, there was a hill, and before any child opened its mouth to scream, a mother whispered into the dark, "Take my sight, but let me see." Long before there was a manor, before the garden's soil had ever been disturbed, the land was a hill of burial and silence. It was called Gallows Rise, not because executions were held there, but because the crows refused to leave, even when the bodies were removed. They circled it, nested in the dry grass, and at dusk they screamed. Only one family ever lived at its base, a woman named Mercy Halwen, a widow, alone. She did not speak with others in the nearby village. She did not attend church. She was seen only at dawn when she walked the perimeter of the hill, hands clasped behind her back, humming to herself in a language no one recognized. And yet, every season, her garden flourished, even in frost, even during famine, even after she was with child. Mercy's pregnancy was unexpected. She was nearly 50, no husband, no suitor. And yet she began to swell, not quickly, but gradually, like her body was not growing a child, but remembering one. By the 3rd month, her eyes had clouded, not with disease, but with milk-white veils as though the pupils had turned to pearl. She began to speak less, but when she did, she was heard muttering to the soil itself, digging her nails into the roots, repeating the same phrase in a low, guttural whisper, "Take my sight. Let me see. Let me see." The village doctor came only once. He never returned. His notes, recovered from his bag left outside her home, were later found to contain only 2 lines, written over and over. "The child sees me. The child sees me." On the night of the 6th month, a storm rolled over Gallows Rise, though no clouds had been forecast. The thunder was not overhead. It came from beneath. Several villagers later described the feeling of something shifting underfoot, like a breath drawn in by the earth itself. In the morning, smoke was seen rising from the hill, not black, but crimson, and the birds were gone, all of them, not a single feather remained. And at the base of the hill where Mercy's cottage once stood, there was only a hole, 10 feet wide, lined with teeth. For 79 years, nothing grew on Gallows Rise. No homes were built, no livestock grazed. Travelers avoided the slope instinctively, claiming it made them feel as though they were being studied. It was declared unfit for settlement, until a man named Elias Edevane purchased the land and built his home directly over the hole. When asked why, he replied only, "It's not a hole. It's a wound, and wounds need to be kept warm." The records of Mercy Hawen's life were sparse. But Eleanor, following the events of Chapter 7, began to dig. Not in the garden, not in the soil, but in the pages of the book beneath the tomb. Each night, the book revealed new pages. And on the 12th night, a chapter appeared titled The First Pact. The images were crude, painted in black ash and dried milk. But the story they told was unmistakable. A woman, eyeless, kneeling before a monolithic womb carved into the rock. She was not praying, she was bargaining, offering something unseen in exchange for sight not of this world. The next panel showed her pregnant, followed by another, a child born without eyes, mouth open in a silent scream, and from its mouth grew vines that wrapped around the woman's body and entered her skull. The final panel, Mercy, smiling, not with joy, but with the terrifying calm of someone who had finally been understood. But the book revealed more, not in pictures, but in instructions, ritual text describing how to commune with the one beneath, a feminine force, older than gods, that lived in the folds beneath the world's crust. It referred to this entity only as the hungering mother, a being who did not create life, but devoured the boundaries between lives. She did not grant children, she returned them. Eleanor read the passage 3 times before understanding what it meant. The Edevane children, born without eyes, were not blind. They had seen too much. They were born facing the wrong way. Into the womb they came from, and the price of their sight was memory of what waited inside her. In the town's folklore archives, Eleanor found a final clue. A forgotten hymn recorded in 1790 by a traveling preacher who claimed the village near Gallows Rise had fallen to a feminine heresy. The hymn was sung only by women, and only during childbirth. It went as follows. "Do not cry, my child, for eyes are cruel. The mother sees for you. Drink from her vein, and sleep in her rule, for nothing past is true." The preacher wrote that the women sang this while covering the newborn's eyes with mud, then burying the mud in the garden. Not the child, just the sight, so that the baby would never remember what it had seen before birth. Eleanor circled the final line in the preacher's notes. "I believe they are not birthing children, but releasing prisoners." Back in the tomb, Eleanor returned to the statue of the eyeless, pregnant woman. Only now it had moved, not from its place, but in its expression. The mouth had closed, the swelling of the belly had softened, and across its chest were now cracks, hairline fractures filled with something red and warm to the touch. Beneath it lay a gift, a spindle wrapped in human hair, bound with dried leaves, and a piece of Mercy Hawen's shawl. Attached was a message, etched into a bone sliver. "You are not the first, but you may be the last." Eleanor did not run. She wept. For the first time since her father's death, she felt clarity. Not comfort, but the horrible relief of recognition. She now knew what the garden was, not a place of rest, but a mouth. And each Edevane birth was not a new beginning, but a continuation of Mercy's pact. A family not descended through bloodlines, but grown from a single, seedless root. And at its center, the hungering mother, still waiting, still weeping. still watching through the children born without eyes. Would you like Chapter 9 to explore? Eleanor's preparation to carry the next child, the ritual pregnancy and its horrifying steps, the reappearance of James and his role in the curse, or the origin of the hungering mother herself, before Mercy Halwyn ever made her pact? Just say the word. Before the silence settles in, there is a moment, a breath, when one knows that the world has shifted. We tell you this because you are not alone in the quiet. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now settle in. Let us walk together into the shadow. The house was no longer a home. It had become a vessel, hollow, waiting, and filled with the steady pulse of something deep beneath the floorboards. Eleanor had come to understand that the family's curse was not a thing of the past. It was living, breathing, and demanding. The night she accepted the pact, the moon hung low, a swollen eye watching from behind thin clouds. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the old parchment she had found tucked inside Mercy Halwyn's spindle. The text was written in a looping script, stained with something dark and almost sticky. Its title was simple, yet chilling. The Rite of the Eyeless Womb. She read it aloud, each word carving a hollow space inside her chest. The ritual began with silence, an absence of sound so complete that the air itself seemed to absorb it. No crying, no whispers, no breath heavier than a sigh. For 30 days, Eleanor was to avoid all voices, all music, and all mirrors. Her reflection was forbidden, lest she see the woman she was becoming. She was to eat only foods grown from soil undisturbed by iron, and drink water from the well beneath the old sycamore tree, the tree beneath which the midwife had first appeared. Her sleep was to be watched by no one, no light to touch her face, no hand to hold. The house exhaled around her, a slow and steady rhythm, a heart beating in the dark. At first, Eleanor embraced the silence. It was a balm for the chaos of her thoughts. She found a strange comfort in the absence of noise. But as days passed, the silence deepened. It pressed against her skin, seeped into her dreams. She began to hear things, not voices, no calls or commands, but the slow, wet sound of breathing, always just beyond the edge of hearing, always accompanied by the scent of damp earth and old paper. She would wake, her pillow damp with sweat, the room thick with shadow. One night she felt a presence by her bedside, cold, unmoving, a shape veiled in black. No eyes, no face, just the hollow, watching. She tried to speak. No words came. Her tongue was heavy, her throat dry as dust. Instead, the silence enveloped her. She began to walk the house at night, tracing the worn floors. The walls seemed to pulse with the memory of footsteps she did not recognize. Not human, not living. In the root cellar, the chair was gone, replaced by a small mound of earth, freshly disturbed, and on it, a single item, a broken medallion. The silver circle was engraved with an eye, crossed out by 2 thin lines. Eleanor clasped it in her palm. The metal was cold, and beneath it, the faintest thrum of heartbeat. Her dreams became longer, more vivid. She dreamt of the hungering mother, not as a statue or shadow, but alive. Her skin was pale and slick like wet stone. Her mouth was a cavern of roots and veins. Her hands reached not to harm, but to cradle. In the dreams, the mother whispered, "You are the root. You are the seed. You are the silence that must grow." Eleanor awoke gasping, clutching her belly. The room was still, but the silence was heavier. She felt the child moving, not kicking or shifting, but pressing outward, demanding, claiming. Her body began to change. Not visibly, but in small ways. Her sight blurred, not permanently. but like a veil was drawn across her eyes when the candlelight flickered. Her hearing sharpened. She could hear the faintest drip of water from the stone walls, the slow pulse of blood beneath the skin of her hands, and beneath it all, the whispering roots. One night, as she lay on the floor of the cellar, the earth beneath her fingers pulsed and then opened. A narrow tunnel of soil and root revealed itself, and from the darkness, a voice, soft, coaxing, neither male nor female, called her name. Not Eleanor, the name given to her by the hungering mother. As days folded into nights, Eleanor felt her sense of time slip away. The rituals bound her, but also set her free. Free to listen, to hear the ancient voices buried beneath the land. Voices of women who had come before, who had carried the silence, who had offered their children and themselves to the earth. Her mind became a veil between worlds, between past and present, between life and unlife. And then, on the 30th night, as the candle guttered low and the wind stirred the dead leaves outside, Eleanor felt the first true fracture. Her reflection appeared, not in a mirror, but in the blackened window. Eyes closed, face pale. The woman in the glass smiled and whispered, "The firstborn sees nothing, but feels everything. You carry the line, the curse, the silence. And when the child opens its mouth, the earth will answer." Eleanor fell backward, breath caught in her throat. The silence pressed harder, and somewhere deep beneath the roots, the chair creaked. The pact was alive, and the child waiting inside her was the next to bear its weight. Would you like Chapter 10, the final chapter, to close with? Eleanor's final isolation and merging with the curse? Or the unspoken ending, where silence becomes eternal and the story folds into the listener's own breath? I await your direction. Before the last candle guttered out, before the breath left the room, remember, you are not alone in the silence. But now, let us enter the stillness together. The air inside the Edevane estate had changed. It was heavier, thicker, like the house itself was swallowing the last of its breath. Eleanor moved through the dim corridors with deliberate calm. Her eyes, once sharp and searching, were now glazed, not blind, but softened, as if the edges of sight had blurred into shadow. Her footsteps made no sound on the cold stone floor. Because the house had stopped listening, the rooms no longer breathed, no faint creaks, no whispers, only the lingering echo of absence. She entered the root cellar one last time. The chair was empty, but the earth beneath it moved, faintly, as if something stirred, waiting. Eleanor sat. Her hands rested on her swollen belly. She felt the child move, not with a kick, but with a pulse that was both heartbeat and breath, a rhythm ancient as stone. The silence grew dense around her, and then, in the stillness, came the sound. Not of life, not of death, but of folding. The house was folding inward, like pages closing on a story no one would read again. She closed her eyes, and the darkness behind her eyelids was not empty. It was full of voices, of faces without eyes, of mothers without names, of children born into the void. They surrounded her, not with malice, but with expectation. She could feel their weight, the gravity of a lineage carried in silence. And as she breathed out, the room grew colder, the air thickened, and Eleanor knew she was becoming part of the house, not as a visitor, not as a ghost, but as the root, the seed, the silence. Outside, the wind whispered through the yew trees. The garden remained tangled, unyielding. The house's windows no longer reflected the moonlight. They were mirrors of shadow, and inside, beneath the earth, the womb waited, waiting for the next firstborn, waiting for the next silence. In the village, Rumors spread again. Strange lights flickered near the estate. Sounds, too low to understand, carried on the wind. A woman was seen walking the woods at dawn, eyes half closed, hands empty but reaching. No one called her by name, but all knew who she was. The story does not end. It folds into the quiet spaces between breaths, into the spaces between words unsaid. The Edevane family, their curse, their silence, is no longer just history. It is a living thing, a breath, a waiting, a darkness behind closed eyes. And now the silence draws closer. You feel it, here, between the words, between the pauses. The story is no longer separate. It lives inside you, waiting to be seen, to be heard, to be known.